Chapter 4, please. I guess 1,000 or more others are out hiding in the back or something. I don't know. The last chapter of Colossians, and a week from tonight we'll start with 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, 8 great chapters, 2 books. On the second coming of Christ, the departure from the truth, and the exhortation to be faithful in view of both points. Makes no difference when the Lord comes if we're ready, if we're prepared, if we're living for Jesus. So the emphasis on He's coming soon instead of He's definitely coming and we don't know when, therefore always live for Him. That's the Bible emphasis. And when He comes, He'll come quickly, suddenly, but we don't know when. So to say He's coming soon is not a biblical statement. We've noticed before in Colossians the practical application to husbands, wives, children, fathers, mothers, servants. Now he gets to the other side of that equation, masters. It is true that at the time this was written there were 120 million people in the Roman Empire, and 60 million of them were slaves. It was an economic way of life. Brethren during the Civil Wars bandied this subject around, and there were some in the South that owned, some brethren who owned slaves, and there were several congregations where the slaves, all of them black, had to come in the back door and go up a ladder into a loft. They weren't allowed anywhere else. I have read both from Alexander Campbell and Barton W. Stone, leading members of a restoration movement, who owned slaves. I've even read in Stone's own handwriting in a museum at Cane Ridge up in Kentucky, where he relinquished his right to own slaves and abandoned that system and apologized for it. Campbell was an exceptionally wealthy man, and he also gave up the concept of slavery. There were those who discussed the book of Philemon, where Philemon was a master of slaves, and Onesimus was his servant who ran away to Rome, and Paul converted him and sent him back home. And brethren in the South said, see, that proves that there's nothing wrong with slavery, because Paul sent the man he had taught and baptized into Christ back home to serve in that arrangement. But if you read the epistle of Philemon, you realize the treatment that he enjoined upon Philemon was a lot different than the owners of slaves. Now, we can discuss all day long where they're kind and benevolent masters that treated those under them in slavery kindly and with courtesy and gentleness and so forth. But the truth of the matter is, where Christianity is practiced, slavery will die. There are some ethics and principles, such as what was called the Golden Rule: do unto others you have them do unto you. So there are a lot of things as a historian and as a Bible student that one can learn about how it was in the first century and in the 1850s and so forth in America, and what happened to the systems and all. But there still lingers an attitude of we're superior and you're inferior and we can treat you any way we please. And after a century or so of that, people rebel. And a whole lot of the problem is what happened in days past and the way people treat other people. I can sum it up with this statement: man's inhumanity to man is absolutely forbidden by the Bible. There's no way that Christianity can be sincerely practiced and such a system be maintained. But while it did exist, instructions were given to those who were servants, slaves, on how to behave themselves and to be the best workers any master ever had. And then now upon masters, as we continue in this discussion, also found in 1 Timothy chapter 6 and Titus, that those who were servants were not to withhold in their work ethic from those who paid their wages. And now he talks about how those who are in the role of masters are to treat and entreat those who are servants. It's interesting that Paul sent Onesimus back home and said, Philemon, if he owes you anything, put it to my account. Howbeit, you owe me your own self also. And he said, I return him now as a brother beloved in the Lord. And here he's going to call him a faithful and beloved brother. So Christianity can reach into any system and change and transform those who are at extremes and at odds in the arrangement. Masters, given to your servants that which is just and equal. James chapter 5 says, woe unto you rich men, you withhold wages from your workers, and the silver and gold and the clothing that you purchased is cankered and moth-eaten and useless. In other words, you gained wealth by robbing those that labored under your direction. So the Bible is very clear on how we're to treat one another, regardless of governmental arrangements or what many might call the natural situation at the time. So a man who was a servant, as we read in the end of chapter 3, and Mark read it for us the other night before we began with Colossians 3, you're not to serve with eye service as men pleasers, but in singleness of heart, fearing God. And what you do heartily, as unto the Lord and not unto men. So if you have a job where you can't put your heart into it, you better get another job. There is a great blessing in earning your keep, as we used to say, and there's nobility in work. In the first 3 chapters of Genesis, he taught that men were to make their living by the sweat of their brow, that there is a ethic for workers. The Bible just gets into every avenue of life, whatever it is. And any inequities that exist, the Bible will correct if men will apply the Bible. So these are interesting points. And anyone who grows up saying, because I'm white, I'm superior to any other person. The most superior people I've ever met are the Chinese. And let me explain what I mean. I've never met as brilliant a people. In Singapore, where I preached, that was one of the most thriving congregations I ever saw. And these young Chinese businessmen were up the ladder in the computer world, way ahead of their game. They just have that kind of a mindset. But they put the kingdom first. And as I walked up to that building on Mul Mean Road in Singapore that morning before Bible study and worship, there were about 6 different pockets of these Christians who hadn't been Christians a long time, who had brought their co-workers and neighbors and friends to hear the Bible taught. And before Bible study started, they were teaching the Bible to these people they brought. It wasn't anything unusual for 8 or 10 people to be baptized into Christ and on a Sunday. And within a month, these babes in Christ were teaching others. They were just sharp and alert. But the evangelistic fervor of these highly successful young business people didn't affect their zeal for souls. If anything, it augmented, accelerated. And they were just absolutely brilliant people. So if we were going to just be honest about it, we want to talk technically, we want to talk about the computer world we live in or whatever else. Another thing, when I was in Germany and preached in West Berlin one night, and that day I spent about an hour and a half by Hitler's bunker where he died, and under the linden trees where they goose-stepped to him and said Heil Hitler and all. In West Berlin, a wonderful congregation. And that night I went home with the American preacher who had been there 20 years. He's more German than American. As a result, he did more good than most people. After Bible study on Wednesday night, his children, just getting their assignments given at school, stayed up 5 hours studying. They were, at high school graduation, able to go into the 2nd or 3rd year of a college that demanded the very best students. The point is, we don't have a corner on intelligence or anything else. We're just human beings. And the system where we grow up, whatever it is, we're to be honorable people, whether we're a teacher or a student, a boss or a worker. And so we have Bible teaching in a very pertinent way, whatever station in life we occupy. God's to be glorified by ardent, sincere effort and not lazy bones. One of our problems in our nation and around the world today is laziness in the workplace. We always want our pay on Friday afternoon, but we didn't necessarily want to work hard for it. That's an average way of life today. And the more the welfare system enters our nation, the less productive we'll be and the more wide open for real serious trouble. The point I'm making is I'm not talking about civics now. I'm talking about Bible teaching on pertinent lifestyle of a Christian. whatever role he occupies. There isn't any place for a businessman who's Christian, who owns his business or is the boss or foreman, mistreating those who work for him. There's no place for laziness on the part of the workers. And if you claim to be a Christian on either end of that scale, the Bible has high standards. Knowing that you also have a master in heaven. So the one who happened to be a master of slaves had a master he answered to too. Continue in prayer and watch in the same with thanksgiving. It's interesting that prayer and watchfulness and thanksgiving go together. Pray without ceasing, and everything give thanks. This is the will of God in Christ concerning you. Rejoice evermore. 1 Thessalonians 5:16-18. The effectual, fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much. James 5:16. Men ought always to pray and never to faint. Jesus taught in Luke 18:1. The eyes of the Lord are over the righteous, his ears open unto their prayers, but the face of the Lord is against them that do evil. 1 Peter 3:10-12. If I regard iniquity in my heart, he will not hear me. Psalm 66:17. He that turneth away his ear from hearing the law, even his prayer shall be an abomination. Proverbs 28:9. The Bible has a lot to say about prayer and thanksgiving, and everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving. Let your requests be made known unto God. Philippians 4, verse 5 and 6. So prayer and the attitude of gratitude go together. And we need to continue in prayer, not just pray when we're scared or when we want something or when 9/11 tragedies come along. A lot of people probably prayed in a very ineffective way that day who hadn't been in contact with the Lord in a long time. One fellow said he probably didn't recognize their voice. With all praying also for us, that God would open unto us a door of utterance to speak the mystery of Christ, for which I also am in bonds. And he's already identified throughout this book the mystery of Christ is the gospel of Christ that was once hidden and now revealed. Christ in you, the hope of glory, Colossians 1:27. That I may make it manifest as I ought to speak, which we need to make it clear. Now here's a great couple of 3 verses. Walk in wisdom toward them that are without, redeeming the time, buying up the time. Ephesians chapter 4 teaches that same thing. Buy up the time, redeem it. Don't waste it. Walk in wisdom. James 1:5. If any man lack wisdom, let him ask of God, who giveth all men liberty and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him. James 1:5. Walk in wisdom toward them that are without. I remember years ago when I was reading the Bible for myself for the first time, not listening to anybody else, trying to crowd out everything I'd been taught, trying to just really learn what the Bible said. I noticed this phrase, them that are without. It's also found in 1 Thessalonians 4:10-12. We use the phrase outsiders, referring to folk who aren't members of the church. Well, that was used in the New Testament. That is a biblical concept. Those that are without. Those are not within the body of Christ. The outsiders, 1 Thessalonians 4 says. So that is a biblical concept. And we need to appreciate that the Bible delineates between those in the Lord and those out of the Lord. Now, we need to be careful when we state this, that we're not saying we are the standard, that we're better than you because we're in and you're out. The emphasis is what the Lord acknowledges. I do believe a friend of mine who's now dead wrote a book years ago in which he said, Christians only and the only Christians. A lot of people resented that and said that's the self-righteous attitude that we in churches of Christ are in and everybody else is out. I believe that was an unfortunate emphasis because it focuses on us as if we're the standard. I don't believe that's wise. Now, only those who have obeyed the Lord are in the Lord, and the Bible defines who they are. It doesn't put the focus on individuals, but on truth. So we perhaps ought to make a better appeal than that and never ever say, I try to get my husband or wife or my neighbor or my kinfolks to see things like I do. We ought to all want to see things like the Lord does and what he wants us to be. Don't ever put the standard in our pocket. But there is a distinction in those who are in and those who are out. Dead unto sin, alive unto God, Romans 6:11. So it is a scriptural concept to speak of those without and outsiders. But they're not outside us, outside the Lord. They're without Him and without God and without hope in this world. Ephesians 2:11 and 12. So we need to be very careful the way we teach and the way we word things. I'm not talking about being apologetic for truth, but realize Jesus is the truth, John 14:6. And He will make us free, indeed, John 8:36. But here is a scriptural concept. Let your speech be always with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how ye ought to answer every man. And that's where we really pray for wisdom. That it's gracious speech, that it's salty, not like the Navy or Marine fellow who has salty speech. That's not what we're talking about here, not what the Bible's talking about. It's like Matthew 5, if the salt loses its savor, it's thenceforth good for nothing and be cast out and trodden under the foot of men. You're the salt of the earth. Salt stings. We ought to sting sin and sinners. Salt flavors. We want to be sure that we have an influence in the world. Salt makes people thirsty. We ought to make people hunger and thirst after righteousness, Matthew 5, verse 6 and 7. Salt preserves. And we ought to be the preservation of any society where we dwell as Christians. And thus our speech needs to match our life and our lifestyle, that ye may know how you ought to answer every man. 1 Peter 4:11, every man speak, let him speak as the oracles of God. 1 Peter 3:15, we're to sanctify the Lord in our hearts, give Him a special place, and be ready, and I notice, always to give answer to everyone that asks you a reason of the hopes that's in you with meekness and fear. So we need to be very, very careful that our speech complements what we believe and what we claim to believe and where we stand. Now, you talk about 3 or 4 verses about prayer and wisdom and influence, all built into these verses we've just read. It's going to be interesting as we continue to study what I call cameo verses and characters of the Bible. He's going to cite several people we read about elsewhere, many of them in the book of Acts, for instance, that had some connection with the congregation in Colossae or Laodicea, which were the nearby places. They seemed to exchange letters from these congregations in the first century. We are blessed to have all of them in the same Bible at the same time. We're really blessed. That's why I have never, ever agreed with brethren who say, I wish we had lived in the miraculous age. Well, we live in a lot better age than the miraculous age. We live in an age that the miracles produced. We have all the Bible at one time. They just had it in parts. In fact, by the time this was written, only Mark, Galatians, and 1 Thessalonians were in existence in printed form to be circulated. Here we've got 66 books, 27 New Testament books, all in one volume called the Bible, and 27 New Testament books, all in one volume. We're really blessed. We have something a whole lot more powerful than the miracles. We have what the miracles produced. They were given to confirm the Word, Hebrews 2, 1-4, Romans 15, verses 16 to 18, Mark 16, 20. So we have that which the miraculous age produced and confirmed has been in existence since the miracles ceased, for the purpose of miracles, to guide the apostles into all truth, John 16:13. So we have all of it at once. We have something far better than the miraculous. That's why Paul said that was in part. And the real whole, all the scriptures have come. All my state shall Tychicus declare unto you, who is a beloved brother and a faithful minister, and that means servant. Notice small m. Faithful minister and fellow servant in the Lord. What a compliment. We know what Paul was like. Now he's telling them that this brother, whom they evidently knew, was every bit what he was, just a fellow servant in the Lord. Whom I have sent unto you for the same purpose, that he might know your estate and comfort your hearts. Those are beautiful words that show how brethren edified, strengthened, built up one another. I think it's Romans 14:19 says, do all things that edify and make for peace. Do we build up people? Do we help the cause of Christ to be stronger? Is that our desire? We can all look back over brethren who meant a lot to us through the years. They may have been unsung heroes, but they had put their arms around us and challenged us to do better. I've told you before about Cecil Pierce in my hometown. He was so crippled up, bent over, that they had to have special pillows in the chair where he sat at the building. And I believe he was just about as bent over a person I ever saw. And he had been in bad health for years and years and years. And how he challenged me and corrected me, and you might even say rebuked me, for not studying as hard for Sunday night lesson as I did for Sunday morning. He said, don't you know you really owe it more to the faithful that come back on Sunday night and Wednesday night? You just had one good lesson all day long, and the rest he wasn't being ugly. He just told the truth. I owe a debt of gratitude to him. Never will forget it. He waited till everybody else had left and called me off to the side. He wasn't trying to embarrass me, just trying to help me. He's a whole lot better brother than someone who maybe didn't listen and said, that's good, that's great, wonderful, wonderful. So we need brethren who comfort our hearts. With Onesimus, and this is where we find out where Philemon and Onesimus are from. Doesn't say in the book of Philemon, that one chapter book. Here it is, Colossae, that's where they live. With Onesimus, a faithful and beloved brother. So it shows that whatever your background is, you can become a faithful and beloved brother, who is one of you. They shall make known unto you all things which are done here. You might put down Philemon verse 10. Aristarchus, my fellow prisoner, saluteth you. And Marcus, this is John Mark that turned back on that first evangelistic tour in Acts 13:14. He's the one that Paul and Barnabas, who was related to Marcus, this is the one that caused the falling out between the two. There was a great dissension between the two. It wasn't a simple statement, but Barnabas made a man out of his kinsman. And here and in 2 Timothy 4:10 and 11, the last thing Paul said before he died, before Nero put him to death, he said, bring John Mark, he's now profitable in the service of the Lord. So he is willing to compliment him. Sister's son to Barnabas, touching whom you receive commandments, if he come unto you, receive him. You might want to remember 2 Timothy 4:10 and 11. Demas hath forsaken me, having loved this present world. Only Luke is with me. Bring John Mark with you when you come. He's a profitable servant. So here's a success story. Here's one fellow, Demas, who was mentioned as a brother in Christ, and in the book of Philemon, a fellow laborer with Paul who departs, who apostatizes. John Mark came to his senses and came back, and good old steady Luke. Only Luke is with me. A man who could have made lots and lots of money as one of the rare physicians of the first century, but instead he went with Paul to establish congregations and to do some of the dirty work of maturing people who had obeyed the gospel Paul preached. So here's a case of three men, one who had been a failure, now successful, one who had been successful, now a failure, and good old steady Luke. We've got to have more like him. And he wrote the book of Luke and the book of Acts too, besides helping to establish congregations and mature them once they were established. One of the rare unsung heroes of the New Testament era. So John Mark turned things around. And Jesus, not talking about Christ, which is called Justice, who are of the circumcision, these only are my fellow workers unto the kingdom of God, which hath been a comfort unto me. So you speak of how great Paul was. What if he hadn't had some comforters along the way? Jesus speaks of the Holy Spirit as a comforter, and that word comes from the Greek word paraclete, which means one who comes up alongside, to bolster, to help, to sustain, to strengthen, to encourage. Now he uses the same basic terminology of these brethren in the Lord. These are my fellow workers unto the kingdom of God, which have been a comfort unto me. I'm going to have 2 lessons over in Shreveport in about a month on a lectureship, and it has to do with leadership in the church. And they gave me 2 of them on elders and their responsibility and their work and the tremendous job they have in watching for our souls. And I wrote out the material they wanted for a little pamphlet they're going to give out. And I dwelt upon the point of those who oversee the flock and watch for our souls, give answer in the day of judgment. What an awesome responsibility it is. What a challenge it is. And when you think of encouraging someone's soul, their spiritual being, or, on the other hand, discouraging, that's one of the, well, it is the most awesome work in the world. I don't believe there's a higher challenge on earth, not even being president of a nation or king or ruler or whatever else in the world, than to be a man qualified to be an elder who guards the flock of God, which is among them, watches for souls, feeds the church of the Lord, guards the sheep from wild beasts in the spiritual realm. Epaphras, who is one of you, a servant of Christ, saluteth you always, laboring fervently for you in prayers, that ye may stand perfect and complete in all the will of God. You remember in Ephesians 6, after speaking of the putting on the whole armor of God, the panoply of the Christian soldier, after listing the various aspects of defensive and offensive work as a soldier of Christ, he said, pray for me, brethren. That's an addition to the armament the Christian soldier wears. He wants their prayers. Each with others' faith, that we may be strengthened, he told the saints in Rome, Romans 1, 11 and 12. He's mentioned prayer about 4 or 5 times in this one chapter. They emphasize that more than we do. I think it would have been a blessing if we'd lived in that age and heard their public prayers and been with them when they prayed more privately than that, to be strengthened and edified and built up by such petitions to the Father. 1 Timothy 2, 1 and 2 tells us we're to pray for the rulers of all the world, not just for our rulers. We're to send petitions and requests under the Heavenly Father's throne. And Hebrews 4:16 says we do that boldly. Let us therefore come boldly unto the throne of grace. I wouldn't be surprised with what our prayers and our giving are the most disappointing things to the Lord in the repertoire of Christianity. I believe it's in those two areas we come up shortest. I'm not talking about every single person, but basically we just haven't talked about that like we should. I remember again that slogan on the ladies' wall in Albuquerque when I was in a meeting that she made herself. No one has ever gotten all that he could have gotten from God. Meaning no one's ever prayed as fervently and as scriptural and as often as they should. But he mentions it over and over again, laboring fervently for you in prayers, that you may stand perfect and complete, whole, mature, and complete in all the will of God. So in order to do that, prayer enters into that. If we'd ever accomplish the perfect or complete, the absolute in the Christian life. For I bear him record that he hath a great zeal for you, and that them that are in Laodicea, and them in Hierapolis. Those were the 3 major cities, Colossae, Hierapolis, Laodicea, in the Lycium Valley. And at one time, Colossae had been the largest, strongest, wealthiest, now it was the weakest. Laodicea was so wealthy that when a cyclone came there in about the year 60, and just leveled it to the ground, they rebuilt the city on their own and wouldn't receive any money from the Roman Empire. They were arrogantly, proudly defiant. They were so self-sustained, and that spirit bled over into the church. They didn't even need the Lord, they thought. So Laodicea had taken over the ascendancy and had the greatest factories, the greatest eye salve in the world. The first century was made in Laodicea. The finest and largest woolen garment factories we see today in the Roman Empire was in Laodicea. So Colossae had gone back and Laodicea had gone up in wealth and fame and sustenance. But it shows how things can change. You remember in Revelation 3, the Lord said to Laodicea, you make me sick. You have everything but Christ, so you have nothing. I'll spew you out of my mouth, because you say, I have need of nothing. And when people get to that point, they're their own worst enemy. There should never ever be in the body of Christ this concept of we have it made. We've got our ticket punched. We're doing the best we'll ever do. Luke, the beloved physician, and Demas greet you. First time he mentioned Demas chronologically, he called him my fellow servant in the Lord. 1 chapter book of Philemon. Secondly, he says Demas. That's all. Doesn't comment. The last time, Demas have forsaken me, having loved this present world. 1 John 2 says, if any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. And I've met some Demases in my day. I wrote an article years ago that appeared in several major periodicals among brethren, and then it's picked up in bulletins, and I see it every once in a while again. I just call it Demas. And in it I made a few suggestions on what happened to Demas. What caused him to leave fellow labor with Paul in the gospel to just Demas, and then finally, he hath forsaken me, having loved this present world. And I made a few suggestions. Did he quit studying the scriptures? That's what's happened to some preaching brethren of mine. Did he become carnal and worldly? That's happened to some preacher friends of mine. Did he begin to study philosophy and psychology of men and not the scriptures? That's happened to a lot of preaching brethren I've known. Did he get entangled with a woman he had no right to be tied to? That's happened to a whole lot of preachers I've known. Wonder what happened to Demas. Maybe a combination of those things. Somewhere his love for the gospel waned. A person ought to be willing to back up and check himself on that. If it ever gets to be a chore or tedious or blasé, he better do something else. We have too many people, like the young man in the first school of preaching I taught in after I came back from Australia. It was the largest attended school of preaching then and since then. We had 58 students in the opening class. And then there were 30 and 25 more in the others, but nearly 60. And as they walked into the room, as I was teaching 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus, the work of gospel preachers, I said, take out a piece of paper and something to write with and write down why you want to be a gospel preacher. You came here to be a gospel preacher. Why did you do that? And a fellow named A.J. Johnson wrote, I want to be a preacher so I can perform weddings and funerals and travel around the world. I guarantee he said that. I said, Brother Johnson, I believe you better go home. I don't believe you need to be here. You don't even understand what this is all about. Can you imagine a fellow, at least he's honest. I wonder how many others, without saying that, kind of felt that way. I loved what one fellow said. I want to be a gospel preacher so I can set men free. Another said, I want to be a gospel preacher because gospel preaching has saved my soul and helped me to build convictions, and I want to assist others in that. One fellow had an independent grocery store in Jonesboro, Arkansas that was making more money than he could count. He sold that, shut the door, and supported himself through that school and became a brilliant teacher. He's even written a couple of commentaries. And this old boy wanted to preach that so badly he gave up. People said, you are crazy. You worked hard and built up a business here that'll sustain you and your family for life. And he said, that isn't what I want to do. He said, I've tried to be noble in my work and help other people, and I have made a good living and all, but that's not what I'm on earth for. And you ought to have read some things he wrote out of deep conviction. But I'll never forget old Johnson. I want to be a preacher so I can be famous. He was already infamous. He needed to do something. Luke, the beloved physician, and Demas greet you. No telling what Luke gave up to serve the Lord. Beautiful. Salute the brethren which are in Laodicea and Memphis, and the church which is in his house. In the book of Philemon, we learned that the congregation in Colossae met in Philemon's house, and his wife and son are mentioned by name too. You remember that Aquila and Priscilla were fellow tent makers with Paul, and they worked together in supporting the gospel, and Paul supporting himself, so the shallow Corinthians wouldn't accuse him of preaching for pay, and robbed other churches like Philippi and Thessalonica, who sent wages to him, lest the Corinthians accuse him falsely, and yet they accused him falsely anyway. He did his part, but I think this is interesting. Here's another one. The congregation met in his house, which shows that this building is not the church. is a meeting place for the church, and we could just as well meet in someone's home as brethren do around the world. The finest Christians I've ever met in my life came from Poland, and they were persecuted, intensely persecuted. They met in barns and houses, and they had no concept of needing a fancy building. And when they moved to Adelaide, Australia, they just had very little furniture in their house so that the church in Port Adelaide could meet in their home. Their whole life was devoted to preaching the gospel and worshiping God correctly, and they turned their life and their homes into that. So the church which is in his house, the called out who meet in Nympus's house, just like Philemon and his wife and son's house. And when this epistle is read among you, cause it be read also in the church of the Laodiceans, and that ye likewise read the epistle from Laodicea. This shows congregational cooperation. They shared these epistles. They shared parts of the Bible. Therefore, it would be all right, I'm sure, for us to send Bibles to a new congregation is being established, to support them in such a way they could buy Bibles in their own language, or as they begin to work in a new place, to help them with benches and songbooks and Bibles and so forth. If brethren about 50 years ago had discussed congregational cooperation properly and had denied congregational domination, where one congregation dominated others and became the headquarters for a lot of others, we wouldn't have had the division that hurt us badly. That's a division that should never have come. They rode out on other things, but it really was a lack of brotherly love in allowing each congregation to fully cooperate with one another in Bible ways, but never have a centralized promotional sponsoring church arrangement. And anyone who's ever read church history knows about oligarchy, which means a rule of a few, and the metropolitan churches at Constantinople and Rome and so forth. There were about 5 of them that dominated other congregations, especially little rural country congregations. And they even had a metropolitan bishopric, where instead of elders, plural, overseeing each congregation, they soon had one bishop overseeing a whole area, like a diocesan Roman Catholic concept. And that's where the Pope came from. See, when you start out with 5 that want to dominate all the congregations, when 1 Peter 5 says elders are to oversee the flock of God that is among you, what will be the next step? One of those 5 wants to be in charge of all of them. And sure enough, Rome and Constantinople rose to the top of the heap of these 5 metropolitan churches, and they were vying for power on who would be the first universal bishop, papa, pope. Constantinople was 18 years ahead of Rome for a while. John the Faster in Constantinople was ahead of them by 18 years. Someone said he was just faster than Boniface III over in Rome, but then Rome got into the picture and dominated Constantinople, and pretty soon you had the universal bishop or papa or pope. And it all came from a perversion of congregational autonomy, each self-governing and yet cooperating one another. Congregational cooperation is all the way through the New Testament, but congregational domination is nowhere in the New Testament. I preached for a congregation about 100 miles from here for 5 years when some of the projects were being started and being promoted, and an elder that I'd gone to college with, even played football with, an elder from the Highland Church in Abilene, as they began to push the Herald of Truth and so forth, which has gone into apostasy now. But anyway, he called and he said, we notice we're not receiving any help from the congregation there, and said, you know, if you don't, we could pretty well mark you with some other churches in East Texas. I said, Wally, did you hear what you just said? I want to tell you something. We're supporting about 11 preachers around the world. We haven't asked you for a penny. I guess we'll have to mark you as being unevangelistic. I said, you're threatening somebody without Bible authority in the first place. And if everybody listened to you, we would have the oligarchy, a rule of a few, the big shot brethren, telling little congregations what to do. We were giving far more percentage-wise in world evangelism. They even got started doing it, and they used most of the money they got from everybody else to boast about their own achievements with. I was never so disappointed, and he couldn't believe that I'd say that to him. I couldn't believe he'd ask me and tell me and threaten me the way he did. But that's what happens when people get too big for their britches. And that's where popery came from, right there. So we need to always ask for authority, even among brethren. By what authority do you do this? But here's a case of the church of Laodicea and the church of Colossae, all in the same area, working together, sharing epistles, inspired letters from the Apostle Paul and from John, whoever else. And say to Archippus, take heed to the ministry which thou hast received in the Lord, that thou fulfill it. The salutation by the hand of me, Paul. Remember my bonds. Grace be with you. Amen. What a rich little book. Christ in you, the hope of glory. You're complete in Christ. Do all that you do by the name of Christ. And watch and pray. Stay in touch with the Lord and with your brethren. Read the Scriptures. And let's work together for the upbuilding of the cause of Christ. And I suppose if I were to choose one single verse that dominates the general thinking, it'd be Colossians 3:16. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly. And the word dwell means take up its permanent abiding place in your heart. Don't invite it in, then push it out. Let the word of Christ dwell in you, deepen in you richly. That's what this book's all about. Remember the circle with the dot in the middle? Circle represents your life and mine. The dot right in the middle is Christ, the center of my life. How would I act? How should I think? That's what Christianity is all about. And Colossians sums that up as well as any. Again, Ephesians emphasizes the church of Christ, and Colossians the Christ of the church, and you can't have one without the other. He purchased the church with his own blood. You can't separate the blood of Christ from the church of Christ. Now, when we come to the next series of lessons, next Wednesday night, we'll start with 1 Thessalonians. And there are three main points in these books: the coming of Christ, the apostasy from the truth that will precede it, and the exhortation to be faithful so that whenever the Lord comes and whoever apostatizes, you'll be ready. And that's how cogent and perceptive and central the book is.